On my 60th birthday, my son-in-law stood up at the table my late wife used to set for every family dinner, tapped his glass, and told everyone that the restaurant I'd spent 31 years building was, in his words, basically running on fumes and sentiment. My daughter laughed before I did. He didn't know that 3 days earlier, I'd already met with a lawyer about what happens to Rosalie's kitchen after I'm gone. He didn't know I'd changed my mind about a lot of things by the time I picked up my fork again. My name is Walter Reyes, and before I tell you what happened at that table, do me a favor, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight, because I read every single one of them. And if you've never sat with me before, go ahead and subscribe now, because you're going to want to see how this one ends. I have to tell you about my wife first, because none of what I did afterward will make sense without her. Rosalie Reyes ran the front of house at our restaurant for 28 years, and she had a rule she never broke. Nobody eats alone in her dining room, not ever. Not even the man who came in every Friday night by himself and ordered the same plate of enchiladas verdes and barely said 10 words. She'd sit down across from him for 5 minutes between tables, every single week, and ask him about his week, like he was the only customer in the building. When one of our line cooks, a kid named Marcus, who was maybe 19 at the time, got his car repossessed and couldn't make it to his shifts, Rosalie didn't say a word to me. She just started picking him up herself, every morning, in her own car, for 4 months, until he'd saved enough for a used truck. I only found out because Marcus told me at her funeral, standing in the parking lot in his good shirt, crying harder than I was. She kept a little spiral notebook behind the host stand with regulars' names and their kids' names and what allergies to watch for, and after she passed, I found 11 of those notebooks going back to 1997. She never once told anyone she was doing any of it. Rosalie died 14 months ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in February, gone by July. 5 months, start to finish. I'm telling you this now because you need to understand exactly what kind of woman my son-in-law thought he could joke about in front of a room full of people who loved her. I'm 61 years old. I opened Rosalie's Kitchen on Danforth Avenue in Springfield, Missouri, back when it was just a taco counter with 4 stools. And I built it, brick by brick, and year by year, into the kind of place where 3 generations of the same families come in on Sunday afternoons. I'm not a complicated man. I get there before the prep cooks. I still make the salsa verde myself, every morning, because I don't trust the recipe to anyone else's hands, not even now. And for almost 5 years, I let my son-in-law say things about that restaurant, and about me, that I should have stopped the very first time they came out of his mouth. That part's on me, not him. I want to be honest about that, because I don't come out of this story looking like a saint, and I'm not going to pretend I do. My daughter's name is Emily. She married a man named Grant Pierce 4.5 years ago. Grant works in commercial real estate development on the west side of town, and for the better part of 2 years, his biggest project, a mixed-use retail complex out near the highway, had been bleeding money in ways I only understood in pieces, because Emily would let things slip and then immediately walk them back, the way people do when they're used to smoothing things over for somebody else. The dinner was on a Saturday night in late June, my 60th birthday, hosted at Emily and Grant's house because Emily insisted, said she wanted to do something special, since it was a big one. The table was set with Rosalie's good linen, the cream-colored tablecloth with the little embroidered edges that used to live folded in our hall closet on Birchwood Court, now folded God knows where in a drawer at their house. 8 places set. I remember looking at my watch right as Grant stood up with his wine glass, because something in the way he cleared his throat made my stomach go tight before he'd said a single word. 7:30. I remember thinking, "Not tonight, please, not tonight." "To Walter," he said, smiling around the table but not really looking at me. 60 years old, and still out there every morning making salsa by hand, like it's 1994. A little laugh went around the table, the kind people give when they're not sure yet if it's supposed to be funny. Grant kept going. "I mean it with love, Walter. But at some point, somebody's got to say it. That place is basically running on fumes and sentiment at this point. Rosalie's the one who kept the lights on with charm. You're just kind of coasting on the name now. He raised his glass a little higher. Here's to knowing when it's time to let the next generation modernize things. The room went quiet in that particular way. A room goes quiet when everybody heard exactly what was said, and nobody wants to be the first one to react. My niece, sitting near the end of the table, stopped mid-bite. My daughter laughed. Not a big laugh. A small, nervous, please, let this be fine kind of laugh, but a laugh, and hearing it come out of her mouth did something to me that Grant's words alone never could have. I set my fork down. I said his name. And I told him that wasn't a joke to make about a woman 14 months in the ground, and that the restaurant wasn't his to weigh in on, modernized or otherwise. I said it evenly. I didn't raise my voice. I've thought about that a lot since that it wasn't the volume that landed. It was that my hands weren't shaking when I said it. Grant didn't apologize. He looked almost pleased, actually, like I'd finally confirmed something he'd suspected about me for years. Everybody's a little sensitive tonight, he said, to the table, not to me. And that's when Emily spoke up, quiet at first. Dad. Just my name. The way she used to say it when she was small and wanted my attention without making a scene. I didn't answer right away because I genuinely didn't know what she wanted me to do. Apologize for defending her mother's memory. Then her voice changed. Apologize to my husband right now, or don't bother coming to Thanksgiving this year. Grant smirked. That's the only word for the look on his face. Small, satisfied, like a man watching a debt finally get collected after years of patient waiting. I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a sound I can still hear if I close my eyes. I looked at my daughter, and I said 6 words. Then I won't be coming, ever. I picked my jacket up off the back of my chair, the gray wool one Rosalie bought me for our 25th anniversary, the only nice jacket I own, and I walked out through the kitchen, past a birthday cake nobody had cut yet, out the side door into a night that had a temperature and nothing else. No smell, no sound, just warm June air, sitting on my skin like it didn't know what to do with itself either. A sprinkler was running 2 yards down, ticking against somebody's fence. I got into my truck, a 2015 Chevy Silverado with 130,000 miles on it, and I sat there in the driveway for a good 2 minutes before I could make my hands turn the key. If you've ever had a moment where the people who were supposed to be in your corner made you feel like a stranger in your own family, I want you to know you're not the only one sitting with that feeling tonight. Go ahead and hit that like button if this is landing somewhere real for you. We're just getting started, and I promise you, this story does not end in that driveway. Now I have to back up, because there's a piece of this you need before I tell you what I did next. Her name is Priscilla Odom. Everybody at the restaurant just calls her Miss P. She started as a dishwasher at Rosalie's Kitchen 19 years ago, back when she was barely 22 and going through a divorce with 2 little kids and nowhere steady to be. Rosalie hired her on the spot. No interview, just looked at her and said, "Can you start Thursday?" 19 years later, Miss P runs our entire kitchen. She trained under 3 different head chefs and outlasted every one of them. When Rosalie got sick, Miss P was the one who started showing up at our house on Birchwood Court twice a week with containers of food she'd cooked herself, on her own time, off the clock, because she said Rosalie shouldn't have to worry about what she was eating on top of everything else. She never asked for anything back. She still comes by my place most Sundays, sits with me on the back porch for an hour, doesn't need me to talk if I don't feel like talking. I hadn't really let myself look straight at what that meant until I was driving home from Emily and Grant's house with my jaw clenched so tight it ached. And it hit me that Miss Priscilla Odom had shown up for my family more steadily in 14 months than my own son-in-law had in almost 5 years. There was something else too, something I'd noticed over the last year and hadn't wanted to look at directly. Emily used to call me just to talk, Sunday afternoons, ever since she went away to college. Sometime around last fall, those calls started coming with Grant's voice audible in the background, prompting her, correcting the reason she'd called in the first place. Tell him about the thing with the lease. Until half her calls felt like they belonged to him more than to her. I told myself she was just busy, that marriage changes things, that I didn't want to be the father keeping score of his daughter's phone calls like evidence in a trial. So I let it sit there, filed away under things that were probably nothing. Driving home that night, it stopped being nothing. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't deciding anything new in that driveway. The decision had already made itself somewhere between the cake I didn't get to eat and the porch light I was staring at through my windshield. I was just finally catching up to something that had already happened inside me weeks, maybe months before. Here's what you need to understand about the timing, because it matters. 3 days before that birthday dinner, I'd sat down with my attorney, a woman named Denise Calloway, who'd handled my business affairs for almost 15 years, about updating my will and putting together a succession plan for the restaurant. This wasn't Grant's idea, and it wasn't some scheme cooked up out of spite. Rosalie and I had talked about it years earlier, before she got sick, about what should happen to the restaurant someday. I'd always assumed, without ever fully saying it out loud, that it would go to Emily. It felt like the natural thing. That first meeting with Denise, 3 days before my birthday, was just me starting the paperwork with that assumption still sitting there untouched. Friday morning, 2 days after the dinner, I called Denise and asked to move up our follow-up appointment. I sat in her office on Commercial Street with my jacket still on, and I told her I wanted to change what I was planning to sign. I didn't cut Emily out because I stopped loving her. I want you to hear that clearly. I cut Grant out of any future claim on that restaurant, because a man doesn't get to mock a dead woman's legacy at a birthday dinner and then quietly expect to benefit from it someday, married in or not. The new paperwork set up something different. A trust would eventually transfer 40% ownership of Rosalie's Kitchen to a culinary scholarship fund at the community college, established in Rosalie Reyes's name, specifically for single parents, trying to finish a culinary or hospitality program while working the exact situation Miss P had been in 19 years earlier, when my wife hired her, with no interview and no hesitation. The remaining 60% would stay with me for now, with Priscilla Odom named as majority partner and given a 10-year path to buy in. The same, slow, earned way I once bought into this business from nothing at all. Emily's name wasn't on a single page. Neither was Grant's. Denise asked me twice if I was sure, because that's her job, and I told her I hadn't felt this certain about anything in 14 months. We signed it that Saturday morning, notarized and filed the same day. Now here's the part where the clock Grant thought was working in his favor started working against him instead. I found out later from Emily, in a conversation I'll get to, that Grant's retail development project was carrying close to $300,000 in short-term debt against contractors and materials, and that he'd already told his business partner that the restaurant would be in the family portfolio by the end of the year. Collateral he'd been counting. On paper nobody had signed but him. He'd been telling people it was settled before I'd agreed to a single word of it, before he'd even said it out loud to my face. He just assumed. That's the part that still gets me, honestly. Not the insult at dinner, the assumption underneath it. Sunday, the day after we signed everything, my phone had been quiet since I walked out of that house. Then it wasn't. 3 missed calls from Emily by 9 in the morning, 9 by noon, text messages that went from short to long to short again. Dad, please call me back. Then paragraphs I didn't read all the way through that first day. Then just, I'm scared. Please. 16. Missed calls by 3 in the afternoon. A voicemail from Grant. And I want you to understand how different his voice sounded from the man at that dinner table, no smirk in it anywhere. Just somebody doing math out loud in real time, and not liking a single number he was landing on. 23 missed calls by 6 that evening. If you're new here, this is usually about the point in the story where things get interesting. So go ahead and subscribe now if you haven't, because you don't want to miss what's coming. She had no idea what I'd already done that Saturday morning. She'd find out soon enough. 30 missed calls by Sunday night. I let almost all of them go, and I want to be honest, it wasn't spite. I genuinely didn't have anything left to say that hadn't already been said with a signature in Denise Calloway's office. Monday morning, 7:45, they were on my porch. No call ahead, no text warning me they were coming. Just there, standing on the same welcome mat Rosalie picked out at a home goods store in Springfield the year we bought the house. A plain thing with the word family stitched across it in faded green letters that used to make her laugh every time she said it was aspirational decor. Emily's eyes were swollen and red. Grant stood half a step behind her, which told me plenty on its own, because I'd never once seen that man stand half a step behind anybody in almost 5 years of knowing him. I made coffee. I didn't make a show of it, and I didn't leave them standing on the porch either. Whatever else was true, I told myself, they were still my family. We sat down at my kitchen table, the same one from Birchwood Court, scarred on one corner where Emily used to do her homework, and she asked me, straight out, what I'd done. I told her plainly. The restaurant, the trust, her mother's name on the scholarship, Priscilla as majority partner. I kept my voice at the same level I'd use ordering coffee at a drive-thru. That seemed to unsettle Grant more than shouting would have, because there was nothing left in the room for him to push against. He was the one who cracked first, not her. He said this couldn't be legal, that I couldn't just change my mind like that he'd already told people it was handled. I told him I understood that was a real problem for him, and that it wasn't a problem I'd created. You're doing this because of one toast, he said, leaning forward. One joke at a dinner. I'm doing this, I said, because of almost 5 years of jokes, and because you brought my wife's memory into it like it was a line item on one of your spreadsheets. That's the whole reason. Don't go looking for a second one, because there isn't one. Emily didn't jump in to defend him this time. She sat there with both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, not drinking any of it, and asked me quietly if there was any way to undo it. I told her the trust was filed, notarized, done, but I could see that wasn't really the question she was asking. We both knew it. What she actually wanted to know was whether there was any way to undo that Saturday night at her table. I told her I loved her, and that nothing about that had changed, and nothing was going to. But I also told her I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for her mother in her mother's own honor, at what was supposed to be my own birthday dinner, and that if she ever wanted to sit across a table from me again, without somebody standing half a step behind her, correcting her, she knew exactly where I lived. Grant left first, jaw tight, not saying goodbye. Emily stayed another 20 minutes, and for the first time in longer than I want to admit out loud, it was just the two of us talking. No third voice in the room reminding her what she was supposed to be upset about. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Grant's development project collapsed, because I honestly don't know that for certain, and I'm not interested in turning another man's business troubles into a scoreboard for you. What I can tell you is that Priscilla Odom became majority partner of Rosalie's Kitchen 2 weeks later, and the first thing she did, without me asking, was start a Thursday night program where any local culinary student working toward their certificate eats free at the counter. No questions, no forms, just a plate and a seat, exactly the way Rosalie used, to make sure nobody in that dining room ever sat there alone. I still see Miss P on my back porch most Sunday evenings, usually with a container of something she made too much of on purpose. Some weeks now, Emily calls just to talk, on a Sunday afternoon, on her own, no other voice prompting her from somewhere in the background. I don't know if the door with Grant ever fully opens again between us, and honestly, I've stopped needing it to. I'm not sitting around waiting on an apology from him to feel settled about the choice I made in Denise Calloway's office that Saturday morning. I already feel settled. That part surprised me more than anything else in this whole story, how quiet it gets, on the other side of not needing something from somebody anymore. If there's one thing I hope you carry out of this with you tonight, it's that you don't have to earn your seat at your own table by staying quiet when it matters most. Loyalty that only ever flows in one direction isn't loyalty at all, it's an arrangement, and you're allowed to stop renewing it whenever you decide you're done. If this story meant something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe, and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and whether you've ever had to walk away from your own table to remember exactly who you are. I read every single comment. I'll see you in the next one.